Hello everyone, Nolan West here. Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, energy. The energy sector is one of the first things I really delved into when I was elected in 2016. And it's absolutely fascinating to learn about how the power grid works and how delicate our system truly is, which is a terrifying realization. And you've probably seen some headlines talking about rolling brownouts that happen on the regular in California and the horrible situation in Texas right now from this polar vortex. And you will find plenty of partisan news sources that blame one thing, one simple thing. That's all it takes. And it always aligns with their ideology. I mean, conservative websites will focus exclusively on frozen wind turbines, and liberal sites will lay the blame on natural gas. They are both correct, which is rare, but they're leaving out the full story. And I'll lay out the full picture here. So let's get into it. Texas is in dire straits. I have some good friends who live down there, and they have been without power for more than 48 hours, and it's well below freezing. The situation has gotten so bad that people are sleeping in their cars to stay warm. The state has deployed warming shelters for people without power, but people are dying right now from carbon monoxide poisoning from running their vehicles in enclosed spaces and old space heaters. And hopefully this is as bad as it gets, but who knows? And there are plenty of disgusting partisan ideologues dunking on Texas right now. I mean, there always is. But this is no time for politics. We should be analyzing how Texas got here to see what we can learn. Texas has been a leader in all energy production in our country. They are the #1 state in the country for green energy production. You know, you'd think it'd be California, but no, it's conservative Texas. And they produce a tremendous amount of oil and natural gas. So far in 2021, they have derived 70% of their power from wind and natural gas. And in 99.999% of situations, that's a dream makeup. Combining wind with natural gas, you get the best of both worlds. You get cheap, clean energy when the wind is blowing, and when the turbines aren't generating, natural gas can supply base load power. Gas plants can easily vary their output, unlike coal, and coal plants are being shut down across the country and being replaced with this combination because it's straight up better. The replacement of coal plants with natural gas and wind is one of the biggest drivers in reducing carbon emissions in our country, which are declining at historic rates. However, both wind and natural gas do not do well in the freezing cold. Freezing temps freeze wind turbines in both Texas and Minnesota, and most of the wind power that was in Texas was shut down by freezing temperatures, and natural gas has suffered a similar fate. The Electrical Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, said that their natural gas production and transmission equipment were not ready for frigid temperatures. I mean, that is clear. Nearly half the state's gas production stopped due to the weather. Half. I mean, you can winterize natural gas plants like we do in Minnesota, but in a state like Texas, while they have done some winterizing, they did not anticipate freezing temperatures for this long. I mean, they could have lasted a short time, but not this long. And looking back at this chart, you can see the problem. This storm has knocked out at least half the production of both of those sources. They were not prepared. They lost around a third of their total energy output while they were experiencing peak demand. That is a nightmare scenario. And that's what took down their grid, those things combined. And there are safeguards we have in Minnesota in case something like that happens, but not in Texas. And that brings us to the next compounding factor, their independent electrical grid. In Minnesota, we are part of the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO. This organization provides open access transmission and monitoring for the grid from Manitoba all the way down to Louisiana. And if we are experiencing power issues in Minnesota, utilities can purchase power from anywhere on this network. And if we look at the MISO fuel mix for today, you'll see that over half the energy production is from coal. Compare that with the Texas chart from earlier, and you'll see the problem. Because we are connected to such a large network, we can access an array of sources from anywhere. in this region. Normally, we have to use a lot less coal than in this chart, but we can access it if necessary, and that's a good thing. While Texas is the size of a country, it was way overexposed with wind and natural gas, and they had no backup plan if those failed as bad as they did because they were not connected to a larger regional network. And no matter what the fuel source, diversity is reliability when it comes to energy. Now, those were the two big issues. They lost power because wind and natural gas failed, and then they had no backup plan because they were not connected to a regional grid. There were many smaller issues, though. For example, they could have winterized much more, as I briefly talked about, and they even had to safely shut down a nuclear power reactor because the water they used to cool it froze, which I cannot believe they didn't prepare for that, but it is what it is. Even some coal plants went down because of lack of winterization. But those issues were a mere drop in the bucket compared to the massive power generation loss from wind and natural gas. And this brings me to my final point, and this everyone needs to understand. Extreme ideologies are dangerous, especially when it comes to our power grid. Whether it's the Green New Deal or an independent grid for the sake of an independent grid, decisions made on the basis of ideological purity rather than practical and tangible benefits will eventually cause disaster 10 out of 10 times. We must divorce the energy debate from political ideologies. I mean, I hear many conservatives bash wind and solar because they think it costs too much. But they formed those opinions years ago when that was true. Wind is now the lowest cost energy source out there, even without subsidies. And then you have the green energy zealots from the left who think that we can be completely renewable by 2030, which is insane. If they get their way, our whole country will end up like Texas is right now. We must be reasonable when it comes to our electrical grid. It's too important. It's literally a life and death issue. So where do we go from here? And to me, there's only one path forward that both reduces carbon emissions, but not at the cost of reliability: nuclear. And nuclear energy is the ultimate clean energy resource. It's carbon-free like wind and solar, but also provides consistent baseload power like gas and coal. Some countries like France have already figured this out. They produce over 70% of their electricity using nuclear power, which might be a little over-leveraged, but that's much better than 70% wind and gas. And on top of that, they reprocess 96% of their nuclear fuel. And in America, we have totally bungled our nuclear policy for the last 50 years. President Carter banned reprocessing nuclear fuel in 1977, which caused the entire nuclear industry to dismantle their reprocessing facilities. President Reagan lifted the ban in 1981, but since the infrastructure for reprocessing was already eliminated, nothing much changed because it's too expensive to replace. And even without reprocessing, we still have 10,000 years of storage for unprocessed nuclear waste available. And the last nuclear plant to come online in the United States was in 2016. But before that, it hadn't happened since 1996. Our schizophrenic nuclear policy has paralyzed the industry. In France, they have standardized nuclear reactors, making them much more efficient and interchangeable, as well as incredibly safe. And we're just the opposite in the United States. Each of our reactors are essentially one-of-a-kind artisan pieces that makes them inefficient and costly because every single piece needs to be designed specifically for each particular reactor. And then you look at the age of our plants. Our nuclear plants in Minnesota were built in 1971 and 1974. Think about how old that technology is. They didn't even have cell phones back then. And now we have supercomputers in our pockets. The technology difference from 1971 to 2021 is immense. I mean, just imagine how much more efficient and cost-effective a modern nuclear plant could be. If we are serious as a country about reducing our carbon emissions and keeping the grid reliable, we must invest more in nuclear power. So that's the situation. The partisan ideologues are mostly wrong as usual. There wasn't just one single factor you can put on the failure in Texas. It was a failure on multiple levels. They were over leveraged on wind and natural gas. They didn't have the ability to draw power from a regional grid, and they didn't winterize nearly enough. And remember, when somebody offers something nice, neat, and simple to explain what's obviously a complex problem, they're not telling you the whole story. Or they don't even know the whole story most of the time. So let's take a lesson from what's happening in Texas right now and remember to take a practical, not an ideological approach to our power grid. It is literally a matter of life and death.